It is Monday, January 19th, 2026. And I want you to picture a dinner table. It could be a family thing or, maybe a first date that is just rapidly going off the rails.
You've all been there.
Exactly. And you're sitting there, you bring up a topic, politics, a movie, maybe just a celebrity like Elon Musk, and all of a sudden, it feels like the oxygen just gets sucked out of the room.
Mm-hmm.
You look across the table, and the person there, they aren't just disagreeing with you. It feels like they're reporting live from a completely different planet.
It's that feeling, right, that you're not just looking at a difference of opinion, but a difference in reality itself.
And for the last couple of years, especially with all the chaos of 2024 and 2025, we've all felt this tension building. We've seen the headlines. We've seen the angry TikTok duets.
Oh, yeah.
But today, we're not just going to, vent about kids these days. We're looking at a huge stack of sources. We've got longitudinal studies from Gallup, electoral data from the U.S., U.K., Germany, even South Korea,
Yeah.
that all suggest something profound is broken.
This is what sociologists are now starting to call the Great Divergence. And frankly, divergence might be too polite a word for it. We are looking at what's being termed an asymmetric ideological realignment.
Okay, that is a mouthful.
It is. But it describes a really deep structural transformation in global politics. I mean, historically, if you looked at young people, say the 18 to 29 cohort, they basically moved as a pack.
Right.
Sure, you had gaps between rich and poor or, city kids and country kids, but generally being young meant being relatively progressive, optimistic, and culturally aligned. That alignment, it's gone.
It kind of brings to mind that old idea, right? Demographics are destiny. The assumption was always that as the boomers faded out and Gen Z took over, the whole world would just naturally slide to the left.
That was the theory.
We'd all be singing Kumbaya and voting for green energy.
That was definitely the assumption. And looking at the data we have today, that assumption is, well, it's dead. What we're seeing is a gender decoupling. Young women are accelerating to the left, becoming more progressive than any generation of women before them. Meanwhile, young men are either staying put ideologically or, in many, many significant cases, they're sprinting to the right.
And we're not talking about a margin of error here. This isn't a 3% swing or something you can dismiss.
No. We are talking about numbers that would make a statistician sweat. This is, and I don't think it's an exaggeration, the defining social phenomenon of the mid-2020s.
So let's get into the evidence. Because I think it's really easy to just dismiss this as internet noise until you see the cold, hard numbers. And since we're sitting here in early 2026, we have the benefit of hindsight on the 2024 and 2025 election cycles.
We do. And the United States is, well, it's our first and maybe most obvious case study.
Yeah.
If you look back at the 2024 election retrospective,
Wow.
the gender breakdown for Gen Z was just shocking.
I remember the headlines, but walk me through the specific split again.
Okay, so among voters aged 18 to 29, young women favored Kamala Harris by 38 points.
38, which is,
Yeah.
that's massive. That's not a win. That's a blowout.
It is, but, and this is the critical part, young men in that same age bracket favored Donald Trump by 13 points.
Hold on. I want to just picture this on a graph for a second. You have women way over on one side at plus 38 and men on the other at plus 13. So the total gap between men and women of the same age is, what, 51 points?
A 51-point gap. And just to give you some perspective on that, in previous generations, a gender gap was considered significant if it was 10, maybe 15 points.
Right.
This is a chasm. It means that the moderate middle, at least for this generation, has essentially collapsed. There used to be a lot of young people who were, politically indifferent. Now you have two very distinct tribes.
And this trend didn't just stop when the polls closed in 2024. I'm looking at this Gallup data from early 2025, and it's looking at approval ratings for the Trump presidency. It's almost the exact same story.
It tracks perfectly. You had a 21-point gender gap in approval among the 18 to 29s. 45% of young men approved versus only 24% of young women.
But wait, let me push back a little. Isn't there always a gender gap? My dad is more conservative than my mom. Isn't that just how it works?
That's the common wisdom. It's what we all assume.
Yeah.
But the data here says no, not like this. In that same Gallup study, if you look at the 30 to 44 demographic, so basically millennials, the gap was only 7 points.
7 points versus 21.
Exactly. So your parents might bicker about tax rates, but Gen Z men and women are fundamentally disagreeing on the entire direction of the country. It's a different scale of disagreement.
And it's not just politicians, is it? The sources point to cultural figures becoming these lightning rods for the divide. We have to talk about the Musk factor.
Ugh. Elon Musk. He is fascinating because he serves as this perfect cultural proxy. He represents a very, very specific worldview. In 2025, 41% of young men held a favorable view of him.
Okay. And young women.
Only 20%.
That is the same 21-point gap again. It's incredibly consistent.
It is remarkably consistent, and we have to ask why Musk appeals to that 41% of men. It's not just about electric cars or, going to Mars.
No.
Musk represents a kind of unbridled agency. He's the guy who tweets whatever he wants, buys whatever he wants, and he openly rejects what you might call the HRification of society. For a young man who's feeling stifled or unsure of his place, that chaos energy looks like freedom.
Whereas for the young women in that statistic, that same chaos energy probably looks a lot more like instability or maybe even just toxicity.
Precisely. But here's where we need to widen the lens, because if this were only happening in the U.S., we could maybe explain it away. We could say, well, that's just the Trump effect, or that's just our messy two-party system. But you brought sources from South Korea, Germany, and the U.K. that suggest this is more like a global pathogen.
South Korea seems to be the one that keeps popping up in all the research as the big flashing warning light. The extreme laboratory, I think one sociologist called it.
And that's the perfect name for it. South Korea is where this trend is most acute. It is, in a way, the ghost of Christmas future for the rest of the developed world.
The numbers there, they rely on something called the ideological orientation index. Can you break that down for us? Is this a reliable metric?
It's a very standard metric in Korean political science. So think of it like a scale from 0 to 10. 0 is perfectly progressive, 10 is perfectly conservative. Pretty straightforward.
Okay.
Now, if you look at Koreans in their 40s, 50s, or 60s, men and women land on roughly the same number. They might shift a little bit over time, but they move together.
The parents are aligned.
But the 20-somethings, it's a completely different chart. Young men scored a 5.42 so, leaning conservative. Young women scored a 4.64 leaning progressive.
And that difference?
That difference of 0.78 is the only statistically significant gender divide in the entire population.
0.78 doesn't sound huge on paper.
Yeah.
But in a really polarized system, that's the difference between winning an election and losing one.
It absolutely is. And we saw it explode in the 2025 snap election in South Korea. Young men consolidated around conservative candidates like Kim Moon-soo or the Reform Party's Lee Jun-suk. Meanwhile, young women just overwhelmingly backed the liberal candidate, Lee Jae-myung. But you have to notice the content of the campaigns. This wasn't about tax brackets.
No, this was the election where that anti-feminist rhetoric really took center stage, right?
It dominated. Lee Jun-suk, the reform candidate, he rose to fame essentially by saying feminism is the problem. He campaigned on abolishing the Ministry of Gender Equality.
Wow.
He tapped into this deep, deep well of resentment among young Korean men who feel that they are being punished for the sins of their grandfathers. Their argument is, look, I serve mandatory military service. I struggle to get a good job. Why am I being called the oppressor?
That sentiment, I am the victim now, it really seems to be the glue holding the male side of this divergence together, not just in Korea, but globally.
It is.
So let's look at Europe, because usually I think Americans look at Europe and we think, oh, they're all just social democrats over there.
Not anymore. Not for the young generation. Just look at Germany. The February 2025 federal election showed a split that perfectly mirrors the U.S., but with different political players. Young women flocked to Die Linke.
The left party.
The radical left, really. They got 35% of the young female vote. They were promising things like rent caps, massive social spending, very, very progressive immigration policies.
So young women are basically voting for socialists.
And the young men. They were twice as likely as the women to vote for the AfD, the alternative for Germany.
It's the hard-right nationalist party.
Exactly. They campaigned on closing borders and restoring national pride. So just try to imagine this. In the same German university lecture hall, you have the women voting for open borders and rent control, and the men sitting right next to them are voting for closed borders and nationalism.
Wow. And the UK.
Same story. In the 2024 general election, young men voted for Nigel Farage's Reform UK at more than double the rate of young women. It was 12.9% versus 5.9%. And across the continent as a whole, support for far-right parties among young men hit 21% in 2024. For women, it was only 14%.
Okay, so the what is undeniable at this point. The data is piled high, the gap is real, and it's getting wider. But I want to spend the rest of our time here on the why. Because people don't just wake up one morning and decide to move to opposite ends of the political spectrum. Something is driving this.
The research points to two main drivers, really. One is structural, it's about economics and education. The other is technological, and that's the algorithmic piece.
Hmm.
And we really need to start with the structural stuff because it explains the pain that underlies the politics.
The notes call this the shift from brawn to brain.
It's a fundamental change in the global economy over the last 50 years. We've moved from an industrial economy where physical strength and, a certain kind of risk tolerance were assets that paid well to a knowledge economy.
And the knowledge economy runs on credentials, diplomas, degrees.
Credentials that women are accumulating much, much faster than men. Globally, women now receive 58% of bachelor's degrees and 61% of master's degrees.
51%.
Yeah. And in the U.S., if you look at the 25 to 34 age group, 47% of women have a degree compared to only 37% of men.
That's a 10-point gap in what are essentially the entry tickets to the modern middle class.
And this creates a massive sense of displacement. You have millions of young men who, a generation or two ago, would have had a very clear path to status and stability, a factory job, a trade. Now, they feel left behind. They don't have the paper to compete in the shiny office jobs. And the old factory jobs are either gone or they're devalued.
I found this concept in the sources, the status aspiration gap, really compelling. It's not just that they're maybe not doing as well financially, it's that they feel they shouldn't be in this position.
That's it, exactly. I mean, we raise boys with this cultural hangover from the 20th century. Movies, stories, even their own parents tell them, you are the provider, you are the leader. But then they hit the real economy at age 22, and the reality is gig work, instability, and female peers who are out-earning them.
So there's this huge gap between the expectation that was set for them and the reality they're living in.
And that gap, it gets filled with resentment, which brings us to this idea of zero-sum thinking.
The pizza pie theory.
Right. If you believe the pie is growing, then women doing well is great. We all get more pizza. But if you believe the pie is fixed, or maybe even shrinking, then a woman getting a slice means you lost your slice.
And the data shows this mindset is actually rampant.
It's completely dominant among young men. A study in 2024 found that 60% of young men agreed with the statement that promoting women's equality has gone so far that it now discriminates against men.
60%. That is a clear majority.
Meanwhile, only 40% of young women agree with that same statement. So you have a majority of young men who feel like they are actively under attack by feminism.
Yeah.
And when you feel under attack and a politician comes along, whether it's Trump or the AfD in Germany, and says, you're right, you are being cheated, and I'm going to stop it, well, that is an incredibly seductive message.
It validates their entire feeling of loss. Whereas the progressive side is saying, we need more equity, which the zero-sum thinker just hears as, we need to take more from you.
It's a total communication breakdown, and it's rooted in this deep economic insecurity. But, and this is a huge, huge factor, this fire is being fed by an accelerant that just didn't exist 20 years ago.
The algorithm.
The digital divide.
It used to be that we had what you could call the 4 TV channel era. You watch the news, I watch the news. We might yell at the TV for different reasons, but we saw the same footage.
We shared a base reality, even if we interpreted it differently.
Right.
Today, the algorithmic architecture of TikTok, of YouTube, of X, it is designed for one thing, to maximize engagement. And the dangerous truth is that algorithms have learned that men and women engage with very, very different emotional triggers.
It's the fragmentation of media that people talk about, but it feels so much more aggressive than just, I like sports, you like makeup.
Oh, it's much darker than that. The algorithm actively reinforces gendered anxieties. So let's say a young man watches one clip about gym motivation. The algorithm thinks, okay, he likes self-improvement. Then it serves him a video about why modern men are losing their way, then a video about how feminism destroyed the traditional family, and before he knows it, he's watching Andrew Tate.
And we have to talk about the manosphere. I mean, even with Tate, in all his legal trouble, you cannot scroll on these platforms for 5 minutes without hitting that kind of post-Tate influencer content.
The Tate effect is incredibly sticky. A 2025 study showed that 41% of young men who knew of him viewed him favorably. And the reason isn't just because they all hate women, it's because these manfluencers offer what sociologists call effective currency.
Effective currency, what's that?
Emotional validation. These influencers who project this hegemonic masculinity of fast cars, cigars, and total dominance, they are often the only ones acknowledging that young man's pain.
Right.
They say, you're lonely, you're broke. Hey, it's not your fault. It's the system that's rigged against you. And here is the roadmap to take your control back.
It's like a mix of self-help
Mm.
and poison. Clean your room meets women or property.
That's a perfect way to put it. It weaponizes their insecurity. And meanwhile, young women are in a completely different algorithmic bubble, the womanosphere, if you will.
All right, I know my feed. It's full of watch out for these red flags in men, how to heal your inner child, and, social justice explainers.
Young women are consuming a huge amount of content that emphasizes anti-patriarchal activism. They are learning to identify toxic behavior. They're building this whole vocabulary of therapy and justice.
Now, what about that trad wife trend? The women, baking sourdough and prairie dresses. Does that counter the feminist trend?
It's visually loud online, but it's statistically very small.
Yeah.
The vast, vast majority of female digital engagement is trending toward progressive, trans-inclusive feminism. So what you have is this massive feedback loop.
Okay.
Men are being told online constantly that they are the victims of feminism, and women are being told constantly that they are the victims of the patriarchy.
And then both sides arrive at that first dinner date, armed with hundreds of hours of video evidence proving that they are right, and the other person is basically the enemy.
Which leads us directly into the real-world consequences. Because we aren't just voting differently anymore, we are, in increasing numbers, refusing to pair up at all.
The dating market crash?
It is a crash. I mean, politics used to be a don't ask, don't tell subject in dating. Right?
Yeah, my grandpa always said, vote how you want, just pass the potatoes.
That era is completely over. The 2025 data shows that 43% of young women, that's Gen Z and millennials, say they simply will not date someone who voted differently from them in the 2024 election.
Nearly half. That's a massive slice of the dating pool that's just gone.
It is. But here is the kicker, and the source of so much confusion. Only 21% of men say the same.
So why the asymmetry? Why is it so much more important to women?
Because men often view politics as, I don't know, a hobby or a debate club. They think, so we disagree on tax policy, who cares, she's cute. They are genuinely baffled when they get rejected for their vote.
Right.
But for women, politics has become a proxy for core values and, frankly, for safety.
This has to be the deal-breaker stat on reproductive rights.
It is. 59% of women say a partner's opinion on reproductive rights is a non-negotiable deal breaker. They don't see that as politics. They see it as a fundamental question. Does this person respect my bodily autonomy?
And if the answer is no, there's no second date.
There's no second date, which leads to this happiness gap concept in the notes, which I have to say, it completely flips the script on everything I was told growing up about the sad spinster archetype.
Right.
It really does. The data is so clear. 55% of single women report being happier than their married counterparts. They have built these full lives full of friends, careers, travel. They have, in a sense, decentralized men from their pursuit of happiness.
On men.
The opposite. Single men are significantly less happy than married men. They are, by their own reporting, very lonely.
Is that because they've historically relied on women for their social network?
Historically, yes. Women were tasked with doing the emotional labor, with organizing the social calendar. Without a partner, many men just drift into isolation. The numbers are stark. 63% of men aged 18 to 29 report being single.
63%. And for women?
Only 34% of women in the same age group.
That math always confuses me. If 63% of young guys are single and only 34% of young women are, who are the women dating?
Well, they're dating older men, they are dating each other, or increasingly they're just opting out of the traditional relationship escalator entirely. But for the young men who are left behind, that isolation is incredibly dangerous.
We see that in the suicide rates.
4 times higher for males than for females. And there's a well-documented pipeline from social isolation to radicalization online. If you're lonely and the real world seems to reject you, the manosphere welcomes you with open arms. It gives you a community, even if that community is built on resentment and hate.
So we have divergent realities, divergent dating lives, and now it looks like divergent priorities for the future of the country itself.
The policy priorities are basically 2 opposing lists. Young men prioritize the economy, fiscal responsibility, national security. It's a risk-tolerant worldview they want to protect and earn.
Okay.
Young women, on the other hand, prioritize social safety nets, the environment, and what they term threats to democracy. They're focused on care, on stability.
And what about their trust in the system? Are they on the same page there?
They're on the same page that the system is broken. Non-existent trust for both. Only 11% of young people say the country is headed in the right direction. But their reaction to that distrust is key.
How so?
Men are increasingly turning toward authoritarianism, the idea of a strongman figure who will come in and smash the corrupt system. That's the appeal of a Trump, an AFD, a Reform UK.
In the women.
Women are not turning to authoritarianism. They are doubling down on institutions trying to protect democracy and individual rights through the existing, albeit very flawed, frameworks.
This just feels like a collision course.
Yep.
We've got the 2026 midterms coming up, then the 2030 global cycles. If we don't fix this, is society just going to snap in half?
If the current trend line continues, yes, we are absolutely looking at permanent social fragmentation. But the sources do suggest a path forward. It's just not an easy one.
Okay, let's talk solutions, because I don't want to end this deep dive on we're all doomed. The outline here mentions something called heel fields.
This is critical. We talked about the brain versus brawn economy leaving a lot of men behind. So we have to find ways to get men into the actual growing sectors of the economy. We call them the heel fields: health, education, arts, and literacy.
So things like nursing, teaching, mental health counseling.
Exactly. These are stable, growing careers with huge demand. But they are culturally coded as women's work, and let's be honest, they are often lower paid because they've been female-dominated for so long.
So how do you get a guy who grew up thinking he needs to be a warrior or a builder to want to become a nurse?
You have to reframe the status. We need to do for heel fields with boys today what we did for STEM with girls back in the 90s. We need to market nursing and teaching as high-stakes, high-skill, essential roles. Be a paramedic, you save lives. Be a teacher, you shape the future.
And pay them more.
And you have to pay these jobs enough that they can support a family. That directly solves the provider anxiety we talked about earlier.
So it's an economic intervention, but it's also a PR campaign for a new kind of masculinity.
It has to be. We need to decouple the idea of masculinity from just physical labor or dominance.
And what about the algorithms? Can we do anything to fix the digital poison?
That is going to require regulation. I don't see a way around it. We cannot continue to let profit-driven companies radicalize teenagers just to get ad revenue. There's a growing consensus that we need transparency on how these algorithms work.
So we can see what's being pushed to whom.
Right. If a platform is systematically pushing misogynistic content to a 15-year-old boy because it keeps him watching, that needs to be treated as a public health hazard.
Like putting a warning label on a pack of cigarettes.
Or restricting the nicotine content in the cigarette. We need to somehow lower the viral load of hate in the algorithm.
It really feels like we have a lot of work to do. We are staring at an entire generation that is just drifting apart on tectonic plates.
We are, and the stakes couldn't possibly be higher. This isn't just about who wins the next election.
Which brings me to the one thought I just can't shake from all this. We've talked about votes, we've talked about apps, but think about the biology of it all. If young men and young women are living in different digital realities, if they're voting for completely opposing worldviews, and if almost half of young women refuse to even date across that political line.
The family unit itself becomes the casualty.
Right. What does the family even look like in 20 years? What does population growth look like? If we can't agree enough to sit through a single dinner date, we certainly aren't going to agree enough to raise a child together.
A society that cannot reproduce itself. And I don't just mean biologically, but culturally, by passing down shared values, is a society that is running out of time.
That is a very heavy thought to leave you with, but maybe it's the motivation we need to finally start bridging this gap.
It's the ultimate incentive, isn't it?
Thank you for listening to The Deep Dive. If you learned something today, share this with someone, maybe even someone you disagree with.
It's worth a shot.
Take care, everyone. We'll see you next time.